I hadn't laughed in 83 days. Not that I was counting, exactly. But I knew. 83 days since I'd buried my camera in the back of my closet. 83 days since the gallery opening I skipped. 83 days since I smiled and actually meant it. Grief, it turns out, doesn't care about timing. Or milestones. Or how much effort you put into pretending you're fine. So when Aunt Louise called and said, "Come to the ranch for a while," I didn't hesitate. I didn't say yes either. I just packed a bag and left the city behind. Her ranch was a quiet place, tucked between hills and wildflower meadows, where time moved slowly and nothing beeped. No deadlines, no clients, no phone notifications blinking like angry fireflies. Just open sky, rusted gates, and the occasional snort of a horse in the wind. It was supposed to be a break. A reset. It wasn't supposed to involve horses. And it definitely wasn't supposed to involve him. Murphy. The four-legged chaos gremlin with a golden coat, an attitude the size of Montana, and a habit of making me his personal chew toy. I met him on my first morning there. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee, sitting on the porch steps in mismatched socks, when I heard it, the unmistakable thump of hooves. Followed by a loud, obnoxious snort. Then. Plop. Something warm, wet, and very horse-like flopped onto my shoulder. I froze. Turned. And came nose to nose with a halflinger gelding who looked far too pleased with himself. Hello? He blinked slowly, like he was sizing me up. Then he stuck out his tongue and licked my cheek. Hard. I spluttered, almost dropped my mug. And he just stood there, like he'd done me a favor. "Murphy!" Aunt Louise yelled from the barn. "Get your slobbery face off her." He snorted and trotted away, mane flying, tail lifted like a flag of defiance. I wiped my cheek on my sleeve. "Well," I muttered. "That's a first." Later, over scrambled eggs and toast, Aunt Louise gave me the rundown. "Murphy came to us a year ago. Owner gave up on him. Said he was too spirited." I raised an eyebrow. "Is that code for completely insane?" She grinned. "It's rancher speak for he's got opinions." He licked my face. "Oh, that means he likes you." Comforting. "He also bit the farrier last week." Less comforting. She laughed and handed me another slice of toast. "He's harmless. Just playful." I wasn't sure I bought it. But I kept the toast. I avoided him for a few days. Not actively. Just, subtly. I chose to muck out the quieter stalls, refilled the chicken waterers, swept the tack room 3 times. Anything to stay away from the paddock where Murphy roamed like a tiny, golden dictator. Until Thursday. It was sunny. Breezy. The kind of day that tricks you into thinking life is normal. I was walking past his fence with a bucket of grooming supplies when it happened. One second I was thinking about whether horses like peppermint shampoo. The next? Something poked me. Hard. Right in the side. I yelped. Spun around. And saw Murphy, eyes wide, ears perked, clearly amused. He'd stretched his neck over the fence and jabbed me with his velvety nose. Directly into my ribcage. A perfect shot. "Hey!" I gasped, taking a step back. He snorted. Then did it again. Another jab. Same spot. I clutched the bucket to my chest, trying not to drop it. "Stop that." He tilted his head. Waited. Then poked me again. And this time, I laughed. Not a polite chuckle. Not a forced exhale. A real, honest, belly-laughing wheeze. It caught me off guard. So much so that I dropped the brush, doubled over, and let it happen. Murphy snorted like he was proud of himself. And I stood there in the middle of the gravel path, laughing so hard I couldn't breathe. It took me a full minute to recover. When I finally wiped my eyes and looked up, he was still there, head cocked, watching me like I was the entertainment for the day. "You did that on purpose," I accused, pointing at him. He just blinked. Then, very gently, nudged the dropped brush toward me with his nose. I bent down to pick it up. He poked me again. Right in the same spot. And just like that, I was laughing again. Later that evening, I sat at the edge of the paddock fence, watching Murphy roll in the dirt like he hadn't just emotionally jump-started a broken human. My ribs still tingled. So did something else. Something I hadn't felt in, 83 days. Joy. Ridiculous, messy, spontaneous joy. It wasn't about healing. It wasn't some breakthrough. It was just funny. And in the middle of all that brokenness, I'd forgotten what funny felt like. Until a horse touched me there, and reminded me. Aunt Louise found me an hour later. "Did he get you?" she asked, amused. "Oh yeah." "In the ribs?" I nodded, grinning. "That's his thing," she said. "He does that to everyone he likes. Right where you're ticklish. He's got a nose for it." "Of course he does." She passed me a slice of peach pie wrapped in foil. "He's weird. But he's loyal." "Sounds like someone else I know," I teased. She winked. "Runs in the family." That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, hand resting on the place he'd poked me. Still smiling. Not because I was healed. But because, for the first time in a long while, I wasn't just surviving. I was living. And laughing. Even if a horse had to start it for me. I should have known it wasn't a one-time thing. But a part of me, naive, optimistic, deeply in denial, hoped Murphy's little sneak attack was just a lucky shot. A single incident. A fluke of equine mischief. It wasn't. The very next morning, he did it again. I was carrying a saddle pad from the tack room, humming to myself and enjoying the rare moment of mental stillness, when he struck. This time, he caught me mid-step, right beneath the lowest rib, where I was both ticklish and horribly off balance. I let out a high-pitched yelp, staggered forward, and dropped the saddle pad in the mud. Murphy let out a loud, breathy snort that sounded suspiciously like laughter. "You little menace," I gasped, trying to compose myself while suppressing a fit of giggles. He cocked his head at me. Waited. And then, when I bent down to retrieve the pad, poked me again. I dropped the pad for a second time and doubled over, laughing into my sleeves. Two ranch hands nearby exchanged glances. "She okay?" one of them asked. "Murphy got her," the other replied, like it explained everything. And somehow, it did. That day, it became a pattern. Every time I got too close to the fence, too lost in thought, or even remotely serious, Murphy was there. Poking. Nudging. Snorting. He tugged on my hoodie strings. Stole my gloves. Once, he took my hat and paraded around the paddock like a proud fashion model until I laughed so hard I couldn't chase him. I don't know how he knew. But he always knew. He knew the exact moment I needed to be jolted out of my head. And he delivered, every single time. Aunt Louise noticed the change before I did. "You've been smiling more," she said one evening, handing me a chipped ceramic mug of chamomile tea. I shrugged. "I guess." "You guess?" she grinned. "You laugh like a barn owl being tickled at least 3 times a day now." I snorted into my tea. "That's Murphy's fault. And what a glorious fault it is." I stared out at the darkening paddocks, where Murphy stood under the stars, chewing contentedly. "He's ridiculous," I said. "He's absolutely out of control. Exactly what you needed." I didn't argue. Because she was right. Before Murphy, I hadn't realized how serious I'd become. Not just in the obvious, grief-wrapped way. But even before the worst of it. Years of deadlines. Contracts. Shoots. Travel. Constant pressure to create, to prove, to be visible. I'd been holding my breath for a long time. Murphy wasn't just poking me physically. He was puncturing the shell I'd built around myself and letting air back in. On the fifth morning, I tried to outsmart him. I walked the long way around the paddock. Stayed 3 feet from the fence. No hoodie strings. No loose gloves. No distractions. But somehow, as I turned my back for 1 second to grab a rake, bam! Right in the ribs. I squealed so loud a chicken flew out of the coop. Murphy let out the loudest snort yet. "You are unreal," I wheezed. He bobbed his head as if to say, obviously. Later, I caught myself doing something weird. Laughing in the shower. Not at anything in particular. Just laughing. Because I could. Because for the first time in months, joy didn't feel like a betrayal of sadness. It felt like a bridge. Something between grief and recovery. And Murphy was dragging me across it, one ridiculous poke at a time. That afternoon, I sat on the fence with a brush in hand, debating whether Murphy would actually let me groom him, or just use it as an excuse to steal the tool and run off. He trotted over before I could decide. I raised the brush defensively. "No tickling today. I'm armed." He sniffed it. Snorted. Then promptly shoved his face under my arm. I nearly fell off the fence laughing. "Murph, I swear, one of these days I'm going to get you back." He nuzzled my ribs. And I lost it again. A few kids from the neighboring farm came by that evening. They were helping Aunt Louise feed, giggling and running between hay bales, calling out names of the horses. One of the girls, about 8 years old, shyly pointed to Murphy. "Can we pet him?" I hesitated. Murphy was gentle, but unpredictable. Before I could respond, he walked up to the fence and lowered his head toward the girl. She reached out hesitantly. He sniffed her fingers. Then, lightly, touched her side with his nose. She squealed and fell into a giggle fit. The other kids erupted into laughter. "I want a turn," one yelled. I blinked. He was doing it on purpose. This wasn't just random chaos. He knew what he was doing. He was spreading joy like hay. And the barn was his playground. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how I'd come here to escape my life, to retreat from the pressure and the loss. And yet, in the middle of this sleepy ranch, in the dust and the noise and the mess, I had found something unexpected. Not healing, exactly. But humanous. Messy. Loud. Silly. Like Murphy himself. I wrote it in my notebook for the first time since arriving. Today he touched me there again. And I laughed so hard I scared a chicken. He doesn't ask for attention. He demands it. And maybe that's what joy is, too. Not quiet. Not polite. But real. The next morning, I didn't flinch when I walked past his paddock. I leaned in. Let him poke me. And poked him right back. He looked shocked for a moment. Then did a dramatic fake rear, so theatrical I burst out laughing. I wasn't healing. I was living. And for the first time in a long time. That was more than enough. The first mistake was saying yes. The second mistake was thinking Murphy would behave like a normal horse. And the third, well, that was assuming I wouldn't lose it completely halfway through a peaceful trail ride that turned into something between a comedy sketch and an obstacle course. Let me explain. It started with a simple suggestion over coffee. "You should ride Murphy," Aunt Louise said casually, as if she hadn't witnessed him nose-poke me into a wheezing mess nearly every day. I blinked. "Ride him? Like, on purpose?" She nodded. "Just a walk around the field. He's safe. Comfortable. He hasn't thrown a rider in years." "Has he poked one off?" She laughed. "Not yet." That wasn't exactly comforting. Still, something stirred in my chest. I hadn't ridden in years. Not since college. Not since the real world swept me away in contracts and airports and camera bags. Maybe that was the real reason I hadn't laughed in so long. I'd stopped doing things that made me feel like me. Maybe Murphy knew that. Maybe he'd been trying to remind me all along. So I said yes. Big mistake. Aunt Louise helped tack him up. To my surprise, Murphy stood like a gentleman. No tail swishing. No side eyes. No surprise tickles to the ribs. I think he's behaving, I whispered. Louise gave me a wink. He's just luring you into a false sense of security. Fantastic. I mounted slowly, settling into the saddle. My thighs were instantly reminded of muscles that hadn't been used in years. Murphy shifted slightly, then stood still. The field ahead was open, golden with afternoon light. I felt ready. Calm. Confident, even. I nudged him forward. He stepped out with a smooth, collected gait. I smiled. For the first 2 minutes, it was perfect. Then he saw the butterfly. A big one, yellow and black, wings fluttering like a dance. It floated past Murphy's nose. He stopped. Snorted. Tossed his head. Don't you dare, I whispered. He took a sharp left off the trail. Murphy. We were trotting. Through tall grass. Toward nothing in particular. I bounced in the saddle like a rag doll, trying to remember how to post after years away from riding. My laughter burst out before I could stop it. It started as a chuckle. Turned into a wheeze. Then a full-on, uncontrollable giggle fit. Where are you going? I cried between gasps. Murphy didn't answer, of course. He just powered forward like he was auditioning for a nature documentary. A tree branch whipped past my helmet. A grasshopper landed on my thigh. I was still laughing, barely able to breathe, gripping the reins and muttering, "Don't let me fall off. Don't let me fall off. Don't let me, ow." Leaf in the face. Murphy slowed near the creek at the edge of the property. Then stopped. Dead still. Breathing calmly, like he hadn't just off-roaded me across a field. I panted in the saddle, heart pounding, sweat clinging to my back. You absolute lunatic, I managed. Murphy turned his head slightly and, of course, nudged me in the ribs. Right where I was still ticklish. I let out a shriek of laughter so loud that a frog leapt from the bank in terror. Murph. I gasped. I'm gonna fall off. He snorted, utterly unbothered. We stayed by the creek for a while. I let him graze. Let myself exist. The sun filtered through the trees like honey. The water babbled softly. Dragonflies hovered. I hadn't been this far out in nature in a long time. Not for work. Not with a camera. Just, to be. I leaned forward and rested my arms on Murphy's neck. I needed this, I murmured. He flicked his ears. Then reached around. And touched me there. Again. I erupted into laughter, nearly sliding sideways in the saddle. I swear, you do this on purpose. He didn't deny it. Just stood there. Proud. Ridiculous. Perfect. When we returned to the barn, Aunt Louise met us at the gate. You're back, she said. Did he behave? I tried to glare at her but failed. I laughed so hard I almost dislocated a lung. Sounds about right. I dismounted with a little less grace than I'd hoped, my legs wobbly and face flushed. Louise gave Murphy a pat. You like her, huh? Murphy blinked innocently. Then turned to me and, with surgical precision, nudged me in the ribs one last time. I collapsed against the fence laughing. Louise laughed too. He's relentless, I gasped. He's a healer, she said simply. In the weirdest way possible. That night, I sat on the porch with a glass of lemonade and a warm ache in my thighs. Murphy stood in the paddock, bathed in moonlight, tail swishing lazily. I couldn't stop smiling. I didn't want to stop. This horse, this wild, nosy, affectionate pain in the neck, had given me something no person had been able to. Permission. To feel. To be ridiculous. To lose control and laugh anyway. I opened my notebook and wrote. Today, I nearly fell off a horse because he chased a butterfly. And it was the happiest I've been in years. Maybe healing doesn't come quietly. Maybe it comes snorting, trotting, and poking your ribs when you least expect it. As I turned out the light, I whispered to the stars. Don't ever stop poking me, Murph. It started as a joke. Hey Maya, my cousin Claire called from the tack room one afternoon, you should enter Murphy in the fun day this weekend. I blinked. Fun day? It's a local fundraiser. Everyone dresses up their horses, does silly obstacle courses, stuff like that. No pressure. Just good laughs. I leaned on the stall door, watching Murphy nose around in a pile of hay like he was searching for hidden treasure. You want me to dress him up? Claire shrugged, a mischievous sparkle in her eyes. He's already ridiculous. You might as well give him a costume to match. I laughed. You realize he'd probably eat whatever I try to put on him. Only one way to find out. 3 days later, I stood in the barn aisle staring down at a bag filled with colorful silk flowers, a spool of twine, and something that looked suspiciously like a unicorn horn. You can't be serious, I muttered. Claire grinned. You said I could pick the look. I said maybe I'd enter. You said maybe, and I took that as a legally binding agreement. Murphy chose that exact moment to lean over the stall gate and gently poke me in the ribs. I dropped the bag, startled, then burst into laughter. Claire clapped her hands. See? He's ready. By Saturday morning, I had braided Murphy's mane with rainbow ribbons, secured the flower crown on his head with carefully hidden elastics, and attached a flowy purple cape around his shoulders that made him look like a royal marshmallow. He looked majestic. And mildly confused. Okay, I said, standing back to admire my questionable handiwork. Now all you have to do is not eat your own tail. He blinked. Then reached forward and licked my elbow. I took that as a yes. The field beside the community center had been transformed into a makeshift arena, complete with hay bale seating, food trucks, and a small obstacle course involving pool noodles, hanging rubber chickens, and a row of suspicious-looking balloons. People strolled around in cowboy hats, kids ran barefoot through grass, and someone had brought a miniature donkey dressed as Batman. Murphy fit right in. If not better. Because the moment we arrived, heads turned. A hush fell. And then? Laughter. Someone actually clapped. He's wearing a flower crown, a child shrieked. Look at that mane. Is that glitter? I flushed. I didn't mean for the glitter. Claire added it. Murphy stood tall, utterly unbothered, tail swishing like he was modeling for a parade of admirers. He was in his element. Our event was the silly trail class. Simple tasks: weave through cones, cross a tarp, carry a plastic duck in a bucket from one barrel to the next. In theory, no problem. In practice? Murphy saw the plastic duck and decided it was a snack. Don't eat it. I muttered. But I pulled it on. And the moment I turned around, Murphy poked me in the ribs. In front of everyone. I doubled over, laughing uncontrollably, tears forming in my eyes. The audience cheered. And just like that, I stopped caring. I threw one arm in the air, struck a ballerina pose, and walked Murphy through the finish line in a swirl of glitter and joy. We didn't win for speed. Or grace. Or even basic coordination. But at the end of the day, during the awards ceremony, the announcer lifted a shiny pink ribbon and declared, "Best pair, Murphy and Maya." The crowd erupted in applause. Murphy tried to eat the ribbon. I was too busy laughing to stop him. Later, as the sun dipped below the trees and the crowds packed up, I walked Murphy back to the trailer. I paused at the gate, resting my forehead gently against his. "Thanks for today," I whispered. He snorted. Then pressed his nose gently, yes, right into my ribs. I giggled. Okay, now you can have a carrot. That night, I sat on the porch with a cider in hand, Tutu balled up beside me, glitter still stuck to my elbows. Murphy stood at the far end of the paddock, still wearing the remnants of his flower crown like a king who had survived battle. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Pride. Not just in him. In us. In what we'd become. I opened my journal. Today I wore a tutu, danced in a field, and laughed so hard I couldn't breathe. People saw me messy, ridiculous, and unfiltered. And they cheered. He made me believe in joy again. As I turned out the lights and climbed into bed, I thought. Maybe laughter isn't the thing that comes after healing. Maybe laughter is healing. And maybe, just maybe, Murphy knew that all along. The ranch was quiet again. Fun day was over. The glitter had finally stopped clinging to my elbows. The tutu had been shoved to the back of the closet with a promise to never again see daylight. And Murphy's flower crown, well, he'd eaten half of it before we even got home. Life had settled back into its usual rhythm. But something in me hadn't. It was like something had cracked open during that ridiculous, wonderful day. And what had spilled out was, me. The real me. The one who hadn't laughed in far too long. The one who'd forgotten what joy felt like. The one who, for months, had been nothing more than a silent shadow trying to remember how to breathe. And now? Now I laughed daily. Because Murphy demanded it. It was Thursday morning when I realized I was going to miss this place. Really miss it. I'd been here for just over 5 weeks. The original plan had been 2. Just a short break, I'd told myself. A reset. But like most meaningful things in life, the plan had changed when I wasn't looking. And now, my calendar was quietly filling again, emails from clients, calls from editors, contracts waiting to be signed. The world I had escaped was gently tapping on the door again. And part of me was ready. But part of me, especially the part with hay in her hair and laughter in her lungs, wasn't. I found Murphy in the pasture that afternoon. Flat on his side in the sun, legs sprawled, eyes half closed in the kind of deep horsey nap that usually ended with a surprise fart. I tiptoed toward him. He cracked one eye open, then let it drift shut again. I knelt beside him and whispered, "Do you know what you've done to me?" No answer. Just a sleepy sigh. "You've turned me into someone who giggles at rubber chickens and flower crowns." He twitched one ear. "And worse, I like it." Still nothing. I shook my head and leaned back in the grass beside him, staring up at the sky. "What am I going to do without you?" The breeze was soft. The silence even softer. Then. Poke. Right in the ribs. I yelped, rolled sideways, and landed with a thud in the grass. Murphy had stretched his neck out, barely lifting his head, and touched me right in that spot, the one he'd found on day 1. My laughter burst out instantly, unstoppable, wild. He lifted his head slightly and gave me the most self-satisfied horsey look I'd ever seen. "I'm lying on the ground." I gasped between fits of laughter. "There's no reason to do that." He snorted. Then nudged me again. Tears streamed down my face as I curled into a ball of giggles. And the truth hit me, hard and bright. I didn't want to stop. Not just the laughing. The feeling. The freedom to be ridiculous. To be real. To be whole again. Later, as I brushed the dirt from my jeans and tried to regain composure, I looked down at Murphy, who had flopped back into his nap like nothing had happened, and whispered, "You healed me, didn't you?" He didn't move. But I knew the answer. That evening, I stood in the barn aisle, holding a carrot in one hand and a camera in the other. My old Nikon. The one I hadn't touched since everything changed. The one I'd buried in the back of a drawer under excuses and grief. I turned it over in my hands, brushed dust from the lens. My fingers moved slowly at first, unsure. Then faster. Familiar. I stepped into Murphy's stall, raised the camera, and snapped a photo. He blinked in surprise. Then shoved his face directly into the lens. The picture came out blurry. But it was perfect. By sunset, I had 50 photos. Murphy eating hay. Murphy rolling in dirt. Murphy trying to chew the zipper on my jacket. Every single one made me laugh. And every single one reminded me of something I'd forgotten. I loved this. Capturing moments. Telling stories. And this? This story mattered. Because it was mine. And his. Aunt Louise found me later, sitting cross-legged in the tack room, camera on my lap, face sore from smiling. "So," she said gently, "when do you head back?" I took a deep breath. "Monday." She nodded, her eyes kind. "And how do you feel?" I looked out the window toward the paddock. Murphy was standing by the fence, mane tangled, nose covered in something green. I laughed. "Like I'm taking something with me that I didn't even know I needed." She sat beside me. "You know, he doesn't poke just anyone." I snorted. "Lucky me." "No, really," she said. "Murphy's a lot of things, ridiculous, nosy, mildly destructive, but he's also intuitive. He finds people who are hiding pain, and he annoys it out of them. Mission accomplished. Will you come back?" I looked at her. Then at the camera in my hands. Then toward the pasture. Yes. And I meant it. My last morning on the ranch came with fog and birdsong. I loaded my bags into the back of the car, took one last walk through the barn, and finally made my way to the paddock. Murphy was waiting. Like he knew. I climbed the fence and sat on the top rail, watching him chew absently on a clump of grass. "You better not poke me this time," I warned. He looked up. Trotted over. Paused beside me. And for once, he didn't nudge. Didn't poke. Didn't try to steal my sleeve. He just rested his head against my knee. Soft. Steady. Still. I ran my fingers along his forehead. "Thank you," I whispered. He let out a long breath. And as I climbed down and turned to go. Poke. Right in the ribs. I shrieked with laughter, spun on my heel, and pointed at him. "I knew you couldn't resist." He whinnied, proud as ever. And I laughed until I couldn't breathe. Later, as I pulled out of the driveway and watched the ranch disappear in the rearview mirror, I knew this wasn't an end. It was a beginning. The start of something wild and warm and real. And no matter where I went, I'd always carry the memory of the day a golden horse touched me right there. And I couldn't stop laughing.